Oh hi, I'm the heretic. Yeah, should've seen that coming. Anyways, the Imperium of Man is the primary human faction in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It's a galaxy-spanning, theocratic oligarchical confederacy. What that means will hopefully make sense later. The Emperor of Mankind serves as the Imperium's figurehead ruler, himself having been mortally wounded and incapacitated during the Horus Heresy. He has since been bound to the Golden Throne, which functions as his life support, which keeps him in a state of undeath for the last 10,000 years. The Emperor of Mankind also serves as the godhead of the state religion of the Imperium of Man, said emperor being worshipped as a god incarnate, being often referred to as the God Emperor. The Imperium has endured in a near constant state of total war on all sides for 10,000 years. However, when examining the structure of the Imperium economically, it is nothing short of miraculous. They lasted 10 weeks, let alone 10,000 years. To make this case, I'm going to explain the Imperium of Man in its basic economic structures, the factions, powers, and incentives in play, and how they all combine together to make an economic hellscape that should have killed the nascent Imperium before Horus would even had the opportunity to get into his edgy teenager phase. But let's take a look at the bigger picture. Before we get into why the Imperium should not exist in universe, we need to establish if a galactic-scale civilization would have a government at all, which it wouldn't. In my video explaining how an anarchist civilization would respond to an extraterrestrial threat, I pointed out the economic impossibility of any interstellar civilization having a government. To review, the laws of economics will be consistent on any planet. Scarcity doesn't stop existing just because you're an alien. Even if your moral agents perceive the world through sonar rather than light, through sensory organs on the tips of their 34 fingers, they will still need to figure out who gets what and how much. Evolution will always produce sapient species with self-interest and self-enrichment as their nature. They will have states in their history, but they will face the same issues they have on Earth, namely diseconomy of scale that exponentially increases the cost of them simply keeping the lights on, as they need to spend more to police an increasing population and restricting an economy that is becoming more sophisticated. Western governments on Earth are already past their limit in terms of being able to sustain themselves, as demonstrated by their skyrocketing levels of debt, borrowing, and money printing. Increasing a government's scale yet further to dominate an entire planet would serve only to hasten its collapse. If increasing economic sophistication requires exponentially more expensive oversight from states, then developing resources within our own solar system, such as asteroid mining or Dyson swarm construction, represents a great threat to state power and dominion. The expense of overseeing all those resources would beggar a king, easily eclipsing military and welfare expenses in government budgets by an overwhelming degree. As stated earlier, modern governments are already stretched past the breaking point. This would be positively ruinous. Since all institutions exist for the purposes of maintaining and enriching the institution, as well as those invested in the welfare of the institution, it is in the government's interest to restrict space travel and space development, as it is an existential threat to their power. I mean, why else has the government monopolized space travel and space development in NASA, as well as in private contractors? The problem the Emperor of Mankind would have faced when he was creating the Imperium of Man during the Terran Unification Wars would have killed the Imperium before they could even get off of the planet. The crushing expense of policing their population, regulating their commerce, as well as all the loans the Emperor of Mankind would have needed to take out to get the resources for his pet projects would have been astronomical. Okay, sure, the Emperor of Mankind was a trans-sapient, hyper-charismatic ultra-genius. I get it. But he's still one guy, and even he can't alter reality significantly enough to change the laws of economics. Scarcity still exists, and even if he could score negative interest rates for the loans that he would need to take out, his debtors would run out of resources for him to pillage, and this would create a dampening effect of other financial institutions to incentivize them to avoid him like the plague, lest they become the next smoking ruin of a financial system that was completely plundered by one glowy golden boy's megalomania. His first super soldier project would have run out of funding before it even got off the ground, let alone the second and the third, and you can forget about space travel. Even if he did finance it with money printing, the devaluation of the currency would have all but annihilated the Emperor's resources and crippled his dreams of human galactic hegemony. We can conclude that the Imperium of Man is doomed before it can even begin. However, if I just left it there, it would be unsatisfying. And everything I said here can be quickly and easily applied to any sci-fi government, the Galactic Empire, the Federation, the Systems Alliance. It's hardly unique. Besides, there are many more reasons why the Imperium does not make sense as an economic entity. So let's ignore everything I just said. Let's assume the Imperium is somehow able to access an infinite well of cash that lets the Emperor of Mankind pay for literally everything without inflating the money supply somehow. Something the oligarchy that runs the Imperium in his stead, the High Lords of Terra, still has access to. Anyways, another thing I mentioned in my Aliens Problem video is that people could realistically homestead regions of space so far away from government institutions, by the time the Space IRS tells you you're delinquent on your space taxes, the government attempting to claim your resources might have already dissolved by the time you actually paid them. The way to get around this is to have some form of faster-than-light travel, or FTL. The trouble is that under known laws of physics, it is impossible to travel faster than light, and even reaching the speed of light requires infinite energy.
No, light speed is too slow.
Light speed too slow?
Yes, we're gonna have to go right to ludicrous speed.
You unironically need ludicrous speed in order to maintain an interstellar government. But there is good news. The Imperium not only has FTL travel, but FTL communications. Bad news. It travels through the warp, aka space hell, but worse. Now, this requires some explanation, because traveling through the warp, or warp travel, is simultaneously one of the fastest and slowest forms of FTL in fiction. Assuming ships aren't simply destroyed in warped transit, which is by no means uncommon, most ships can arrive at their destination weeks, months, or years after they first jumped, depending on how far they're trying to travel. However, time is not linear in the warp, but instead, time can go forward and backward, left, right, up, and down. It is known for ships, or even fleets, to arrive thousands of years after they jumped, even though for the crew it may have only felt like days. Ships may even arrive days after they first jumped, but the ship is empty because the crew starved to death millennia ago. There are even incidents of ships arriving before they jumped. The point is that it's very unreliable, and more often than not, the question about arriving on time is the least of an Imperial Starship's concerns in warp travel. Suffice to say, the warp is a very bad place. So you can imagine the logistics of interstellar commerce. A merchant wanting to sell goods to a neighboring system having no idea if their cargo ship will even arrive at their destination at all, let alone at a time when the transaction is still profitable. It increases risk significantly and lowers/lengthens the time preferences of would-be entrepreneurs in any interstellar trade. Imagine you had 100 oranges, and you got the address of someone willing to buy your oranges for $1,000. That's $10 per orange. That's a lot of money. You'd be tempted to head right over with your oranges, right? Well, imagine there was a 1 in 10 chance that you had no control over, that on your way to their house, you would literally go to hell. If you knew about that, that'd change your economic decision-making quite quickly, wouldn't it? You might ask to hire someone to go for you, pay them $100 to go deliver the oranges for you. Well, you still end up with a similar problem, because if your delivery boy ends up going to hell on their or the return trip, you don't get your money and the oranges are gone. While the odds may not necessarily be 1 in 10, this analogy should give you an appreciation for interstellar commerce in the Imperium and how their technology has handicapped their economic development. But this is far from a unique problem in human history. During the days of intercontinental trade in Europe, it would be very common for dedicated trade ships buying and selling stuff to and from, say, India, for them to have a 1 in 10 chance of never returning home. Storms, mutinies, pirates, anything could happen. This made trading very risky, and really only came preeminently profitable with the creation of the corporation, where ship crew members were offered a percentage of their profits as payment. A variation of this could exist in Imperium. Crew members offered percentages of profits from trade in exchange for service. While ships typically feature crew sizes in the tens to hundreds of thousands, such ships can carry quantities of cargo Renaissance galleons could only dream of, so the cost of paying the crew really wouldn't be much of an issue. Superficially, this makes scaling up mercantilism to accommodate a spacefaring civilization seem profitable, but again, I have to bring up this economy of scale. An Imperial Starship alone is a vast craft, with even basic transport and escort class ships being several kilometers long and with tens of thousands of crew members. Significantly more operational inefficiencies than on a clipper, which might have a crew of dozens. But it gets worse. To even be allowed to operate a commercial trade ship in the Imperium, one needs a charter from the Segmentum government, a process that can take decades or even centuries. Without this, barring some other privilege such as possessing a warrant of trade, it is illegal to operate a merchant ship. While only their route is assigned, not what goods and services they trade, yet another form of economic inefficiency through central planning reveals itself. Moving ships back and forth based on the arbitrary whims of how bureaucrats in the administratum believe a merchant ship should travel rather than where markets may actually need the trade. Chartist captains, the captains of these merchant ships, are given legal privilege and subsidies, both in outsourcing their security to the Imperial Navy as well as protection from competitors, since, as I said already, it's illegal to compete with them. A star system is vast enough that any developed system could reasonably expect to be self-sufficient, and sublight travel in systems is very safe and very reliable. System-wide autarky, that is to say self-sufficiency, is completely practical, and is actually directly incentivized since FTL is extremely dangerous and more trouble than it's worth, especially considering the exorbitant prices demanded for imported goods by the Chartist captain cartels. It is a tremendous missed opportunity for specialization and division of labor on a truly cosmic scale. On the top of a lack of information, let's talk about the Imperium's FTL communications, because they have that too. You see, they have a specialized group of humans called astropaths. They possess psychic abilities that allow them to project messages through the warp to other specific astropaths light years away. The Imperium utilizes this as the main method of interstellar communications, both from planet to planet and ship to ship. How does it work? The astropath is instructed to send a specific message which is received by another astropath as a dream or vision. It is then up to the astropath to be able to translate their vision or dream into specific text. Now, in-universe, astropaths are trained extensively in their craft to be able to send messages reliably and interpret the visions of messages received into plain words. The problem, however, should be clear. Not only does the Adeptus Astrotelepathica, aka the place that trains the astropaths, have a monopoly on communications, but interstellar communication in general is virtually indistinguishable from taking LSD. While the unreliability of astrotelepathy is hardly as well established in the lore, how the warp can distort messages, or simple human error can misinterpret or fail to recollect certain crucial details about a vision leads to misinformation. For economic actors, including Imperial government agents, this can lead to major resource misallocation. A call for aid against alien invasion instead being answered by a fleet of ships carrying lettuce, being one possibility among infinity. Military forces may be deployed to friendly, peaceful systems, or multiple military regiments called to conquer a planet but given contrary and mutually exclusive objectives that draw them into fighting each other. colonial fleets might be accidentally sent to hostile alien worlds, or a warning of an imminent alien invasion might be misheard as a visitation from an imperial saint. You get the idea. Because interstellar communication is bottlenecked by the supply of astropaths, whom individually can only send a small number of messages a day, communication is scarce and precious, limited only to the highest priority communications, and what is highest priority is going to be determined by central planners. Now, if your star system was limited to, say, 1,000 messages to any other star system in the galaxy per day, the astropaths might sell their services to the highest bidder, selling their capabilities to whomever valued the message the most, ensuring that what messages were sent out were actually valued for their capacity to be heard elsewhere light years away despite the risk involved. Letting a free market in astrotelepathy determine what is the highest priority message would be the best way to learn which messages were of greater importance at that particular moment in time. But naturally, astrotelepathy is limited to the politically powerful and well-connected, and I shouldn't need to explain the problem with central planning any further. Long story short, the result of interstellar transportation and communication being monopolized and centrally planned by dispassionate bureaucrats is an interstellar empire composed of completely isolated star systems. To the writer's credit, this is consistent with the lore. The Imperium is rarely described as a unified hegemony, but millions of small islands lost in a galactic sea. Given that star systems are heavily limited by how much they can talk to each other and how dangerous interstellar travel is, this makes sense. This is why earlier I referred to the Imperium as a confederacy. A lot of the novels, audio dramas, games, generally, a lot of the stories in the 40k universe are written from the perspective of soldiers, space marines, inquisitors, and sometimes aliens. Generally, people removed from the day-to-day existence of ordinary people in the Imperium and who are likely to view it as a singular hegemony it purports itself to be from their perspective. When ordinary people's view of the Imperium, well, they would have good reason to assume the Imperium of Man consists entirely of only their planet. So imagine, if you will, you're a planetary governor on some imperial world. You were born and lived on your planet for as long as you can imagine. Though you were always some degree removed from the affairs of the common people, you still have a strong affinity for it. This is your world, and you genuinely wish to act according to what's in its and your people's best interests as well as your own. However, your world is part of the Imperium of Man, but what is the Imperium of Man from your perspective? You're not sure, except that you're ruled over by what those crazy priests from the ecclesiarchy call the God Emperor of mankind. Does it really seem like this God Emperor has your best interests at heart, given nobody has seen or heard from him in 10,000 years? The priests who claim to speak for him regularly attack, kill, and incinerate your people, whom you are not allowed to protect or else be prosecuted as a heretic. The Imperium has armies to police imperial law on your planet, and they have been helpful from time to time, but your own planetary police force has done far more to suppress crime on your world. In times of civil insurrection, your planetary defense force has done far more than the imperial military to help. Perhaps most importantly, in exchange for these services, the Imperium provides a redundant police force, an apparently non-existent military, and a destructive and violent cult whose sociopathic tendencies are protected by imperial decree. You have the privilege of having your entire world's economic output offered to the Imperium in a tithe. Resources that could have done a lot more good on your world being used to develop your own planet or even just sitting in your own bank account, instead being given to an Imperium you can't even prove exists. All the while, you're paranoid your last tithe actually arrived at its destination on time instead of being lost in warp transit or raided by space pirates. Because you know that if your tithe is missed, you, personally, are a dead man. Given your incentives for self-enrichment and the desire to help your planet or even just yourself, is not your temptation to just go your own way? Have the Arbites neutralized? The ecclesiarchy priests brought to justice? Stop having your planet's production and its people taken from your planet from the tithe and just secede? Now, if you're familiar with the Warhammer 40k universe, you know that secession is a very bad idea. But think about it from the local perspective. Those risks of being unable to call for Imperial aid in the event of a Xenos incursion, an insurrection of Chaos cultists, or simply inviting Imperial reprisal after your tights are missed, they're real risks. However, those risks are rather remote, and it makes perfect sense that such a governor, acting in their own rational self-interest, would be very tempted to separate from the Imperium they are already isolated from anyways. Why do they care? For all they know, the Imperium died a long time ago, and those Arbiters and Inquisitors on your planet just haven't gotten the memo yet. You can't communicate with the Imperium, at least not easily, and even the Imperial narrative admits nobody has heard from the God Emperor of mankind in thousands of years. Seen him? Yeah, people have seen him, but as a shriveled corpse. The affairs of the Imperium would seem so remote and inconsequential to your day-to-day life, let alone that of your people. Why wouldn't you seek self-determination for your world, even if Imperial forces were en route to stop you? Well, there's a good chance they'll never even arrive. And planets do secede from the Imperium, but this is treated as a rather uncommon occurrence, rather than the almost necessary step planets or systems that already must have self-sufficiency due to their isolation for self-enrichment. Whether it's for benevolent or malevolent reasons is not important. This isn't a problem unique to this point in Imperial history either. This was a problem the first time the Emperor of Mankind sought to explore outside the solar system. The Great Crusade, the military campaign led by the Emperor of Mankind himself to make the Imperium as large as it is today, its objective was to unify mankind's isolated colonial worlds throughout the galaxy as well as settle new ones to ensure human supremacy in the galaxy under his Imperium of Man. The trouble is, he didn't think through the kind of infrastructure he would need to hold onto it, or even how to fund it. How exactly is the Imperium of Man funded again? Well, the Imperium does not have a central currency. Planets have their own local currencies, and while neighboring star systems might share a currency, the communications problem we established earlier makes enforcing a single, unified currency across those regions, let alone an entire galaxy, impossible. The dangers of warp travel, in addition to the monopolies on interstellar trade, will make interstellar currencies all but unheard of. Sure, the average American will likely never encounter Japanese yen in their life, but an Imperial businessman might never see a currency from another planet even if they go out of their way to look for one, whereas you or I might just order a yen note off the internet if we wanted one. But can you blame the Imperials? Interstellar trade and communication is extremely scarce. Yet ironically, this is the actual problem. How different currencies can be exchanged when communication and trade between these entities is so rare, economic calculation as to the value of foreign currencies would appear arbitrary. Can anyone tell me what the exchange rate is between a thrown geld and an Imperial eagle? I know I couldn't, and even if I could, there's a very good chance that information is hundreds of years out of date. That doesn't mean there won't be other methods of trade. I imagine Chartist captains and rogue traders, the primary groups involved in interstellar trade, would make great use of commodities with high exchange value, carrying cargo holds full of precious metals as a great way to circumvent currencies entirely. Similarly, the Imperium may simply pay its agents wages with such commodities, where the currency of the Imperium's capital planet, Holy Terra, may not have value. Likewise how the Roman Empire paid their legionnaires with salt. Finding vendors among a star system whose population is numbered to be in the trillions or even quadrillions for your commodities should be relatively easy. Though keep in mind, not every star system is as heavily developed or populated. The problem of multiple currencies is not necessarily a problem for trade. It's a problem for the Imperial government's ability to maintain itself, to pay for its navy, its Astra Militarum, Inquisition, Adeptus Astartes, Adeptus Administratum, Adeptus Arbites, Adeptus Sororitas, Scala Pergenum, I could go on. The point is, it's involved in a lot of big, expensive projects, endless wars that stretch across the galaxy. How do they pay for it? They definitely aren't running into debt, since they wouldn't have any creditors that I'm aware of. They're the primary human faction in the setting, and the only other sorta human faction, Chaos, hates their guts. there's no way they'd offer the Imperium loans. Furthermore, there is no evidence that the Imperium has any sort of central bank. As we established earlier, the Imperium does not and cannot have a single galactic currency. Any money printing or inflation that goes on happens at the planetary level. Though the Imperium does have decent technology, they definitely can't print gold or salt into existence, so the only way that they could be funding their military escapades is by direct taxation on imperial worlds. The Imperium does not collect taxes the way we are familiar with. Taxes are taken through planetary tithes, as mentioned earlier. While how much of a planet's economic production is actually consumed by tithes has never been clear, and in universe, different worlds have differing amounts they are required to tithe, a differing tithe grade. The way it works is that every generation or so, a huge shipment of resources from the planet, including ores, agricultural goods, or even soldiers, are transported to Terra for use and distribution throughout the Imperial government. On Earth, both world wars would not have been as large or destructive as they were without central banks. Domestic taxation was not enough to pay for them. Governments had to go into debt and print money just to stay solvent. One could say the Imperium's improved technology and greater scale gives them more resources to tax. Recall what I said earlier in this video. Linear growth in population requires exponential growth in bureaucracy. While nobody knows how many people there are in the Imperium, the birth rate is so high it is impossible for the Administratum to even attempt a census. So what does that mean? The larger a population, the more expensive it is for a government to control it. Governments in Europe had to go into debt to pay for total wars with populations in the millions. The Imperium of Man has been in a state of total war for almost the entirety of its 10,000-year existence, and a population I would argue to be in the quintillions or the million trillions. They do not have the luxury of going into debt either, nor can they simply print their way out of debt, as I mentioned earlier. The Imperium would not have a central currency to inflate, let alone a central bank. In a way, this is a blessing, as going into debt or printing new money invites a whole host of other issues the Imperium wouldn't need to worry about. However, these were useful tools for industrial-era societies in the West that allowed them to continue government spending, and we still haven't answered the question as to how the Imperium pays for anything. Even if all its employees were completely willing to forego wages, they still have the equipment that needs to be maintained, food that needs to be cooked, and due to an AI rebellion in mankind's history, the Imperium is paranoid of automation. So they have every level of production and consumption observed and controlled by humans, even if those humans are sometimes lobotomized cyborgs called servitors. So the Imperium is definitely not living in gay luxury space communism. Those humans need to be paid. You still need resources for training, equipping, arming, and maintaining assets and staff. Humans still need to eat. Machines need parts to be repaired and refueled. The Imperial bureaucracy is so much larger than its labor costs, cutting them wouldn't even keep the lights on for another 5 minutes. But this is just a problem with technology, you might be thinking. Surely the Imperium of Man develops new technology that eventually allows them to invent their way out of problems. And to that I say, you're funny. Technology in the Imperium of Man is monopolized by the Adeptus Mechanicus, a technocratic cargo cult that manufactures and maintains all of the Imperium's technology, from electric toothbrushes to spaceships. Their monopoly is enforced very violently. Even tinkering with an engine in a garage is punishable by a Prometheum bath, as they consider AI and innovation to be the greatest evils in the universe. Yeah, good luck getting them to come up with new technology ever. But there is another problem with the Imperial economy that represents an existential threat to its ability to gain resources. And if you know agorism, you know exactly where this is going. Say it with me now, the counter-economy. Remember everything I said about why a planetary governor would want to secede? Well, bring that down to the average individual. Imagine, every day of your life is pure survival. Not because you're actually under attack, but because every step of the Imperial government is trying to kill you. The ecclesiarchy will have you killed as a heretic for failing to show proper veneration and respect to the God Emperor. The Arbites will kill you if they suspect you're violating the Lex Imperialis. What does the Lex Imperialis actually say? Literally, nobody knows, as it would take an entire human lifetime of continuous reading just to get through the preface. The Inquisition can kill you for simply being in their way, all without even a pretense of reprisal for any of them. The Imperium cares so little for your life, they don't even think you're worth enough to tax. And this isn't even getting into the infinite possibilities your planetary government may oppress you. We know people aren't just going to roll over and die just because their government makes it impossible to survive, let alone prosper. They're gonna go into the counter-economy. People will produce their own goods or shave a little bit off the top of surplus production and sell it themselves. On Imperial worlds, it is very common for overdeveloped hive cities to have entire levels of the city just be more or less abandoned, where they become havens for underground societies, gangs, black markets, mutant sanctuaries, you name it. The absence of legislation enforcement makes them fertile grounds for counter-economists. This isn't unprecedented in lore either. In the Fantasy Flight Games RPG books for Warhammer 40k, there are rules for obtaining otherwise illegal drugs, or even for non-Space Marine characters to purchase Space Marine weaponry, even though it is a capital crime for an ordinary human to even possess one. On the hive world of Necromunda, scions of the hive city's nobility are often sent to the Underhive to prove their worth to their families by undertaking a mission of murder or survival. To aid them, they are given a unique powered exoskeleton called the Hunting Rig, a technological marvel that exists only on Necromunda that alters and improves the capabilities to suit their wearer. While their origins are officially unclear, it's not unreasonable to think that one or more of the Necromunda nobility acquired such technology after sponsoring an underground engineering project. Something that would prompt the Adeptus Mechanicus to burn the planet to cinders if they should discover this. Furthermore, hunting rigs are far from the only unique pieces of technology to Necromunda. Given how repressed the average individual is in the Imperium, the presence of a large counter-economy becomes an indispensable tool of survival, either by trading otherwise rationed food or as part of a gang for protection against people who want you dead, for example, the Arbites. To say nothing of the various forms of media and entertainment that would otherwise be repressed in such societies. For example, the Soviet Union, their so-called second economy or shadow economy represented a huge part of their country's total economic output that could not be measured in GDP figures, and was so powerful that whenever the Kremlin attempted to ban or otherwise suppress or crack down on the trading of Western music, the Kremlin would be brought down to their knees by the counter-economy routinely. While it is impossible to know how big the second economy would be in the Imperium of Man, if it is even half as repressive as the Soviet Union, the Imperial government is facing at least half of their total economic output being completely untaxable and untithable. The historical driver behind the rare incidents in history where the state gives ground has been pushback from the counter-economy when the state attempts a crackdown. The Imperium is not facing a counter-economy of millions of people, but pentillions. The existential threat the Imperium faces is its own people, whose production and population rivals or even surpasses that of their own, and are not hamstrung by the arbitrary dictates of imperial law, the imperial cult, or the cult mechanicus. Untold numbers of technologically advanced anarchists will defend their interest against imperial repression. The Imperium will face guerrilla warfare on every one of their worlds on every front. Once the Imperium itself becomes a direct threat to their interests, they will resist its influence, using superior technology than the Adeptus Mechanicus, forces more lethal than the Adeptus Astartes, more indomitable than the Astra Militarum, and more cunning than the Inquisition. Imperial repression on their worlds will simply drive more loyal citizens to the ranks of the insurgency, and given enough time, the worst-case scenario for the Imperium might emerge. The counter-economy may develop the technology that makes centralizing finance, energy, and communications impossible. The Emperor was a reasonably intelligent guy. he wouldn't have launched the Imperium unless he had prepared his move several millennia in advance. Yet even if the Horus Heresy never happens, a galactic Imperium of man cannot work. No amount of hyperintelligence or psychic power can fix this. The Imperium should not exist. It was doomed to fail before the Emperor even finished conquering one planet, and the idea that it could conceivably conquer a galaxy, let alone hold it for an extended period of time of 3 minutes, it's impossible. If the Emperor of Mankind wanted to make it work, finishing the Webway project before he left Terra would have given his Imperium reliable FTL travel and communication to connect his worlds together. You still would have had a lot of problems, mainly with diseconomy of scale, but at least it would be better. Now, I should be fair here. The writers of 40k are not economists or philosophers. Their job is to tell a story, and in that department, I think they did a wonderful job. This is not meant to be a criticism or critique of the 40k universe or elements thereof, and I will still be a fan. Don't allow anything I say to detract from your enjoyment of a piece of fiction. Anyways, this is just a fun little exercise to applying economics to alternate universes, consistently. I'm sure I missed a lot, but hopefully you all learned something, or at least enjoyed this little exercise. Questions, comments, critique? Could what I say apply to most of the other races in the 40k universe, or is the Imperium itself uniquely boned? Leave a comment below. Support me on Patreon. Like, share, and subscribe to become a heretic today.